Sometimes the difference between a genius and a nobody is 30 seconds and a crowd that refuses to look closer. The Texas sun blazed across the polished glass walls of the Lone Star Performance Expo, turning rows of exotic cars into mirrors of light and color. Thousands of visitors wandered between displays, cameras raised, conversations blending into a steady hum beneath the distant sound of engines revving for demonstrations. At the center of it all sat a rare Ferrari, deep crimson beneath the afternoon sky, surrounded by velvet ropes and company representatives. It was the crown jewel of the event, and everyone knew it. Victoria Sterling stood beside it with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms, headlines, and billion-dollar decisions. Her tailored white blazer barely moved in the warm breeze. Her posture was perfect. Her expression was controlled. And yet the frustration in her eyes was impossible to miss. The Ferrari would not start. One technician checked the electronics. Another reviewed diagnostic data on a tablet. A third disappeared beneath the rear compartment and emerged shaking his head. The growing crowd sensed something unusual and slowly pressed closer. Phones appeared. Whispers spread. Victoria folded her arms. "What's the update?" she asked. No one answered immediately. That silence said more than any report could. 30 feet away, Ethan Walker watched from the edge of the gathering. He wore faded jeans, worn work boots, and a simple gray work shirt with rolled sleeves. Nothing about him suggested expertise. Nothing about him suggested he belonged near a machine worth more than most houses. Beside him stood his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, holding a lemonade nearly as large as her hands. She glanced at the Ferrari, then at the worried technicians. "Daddy," she asked softly, "why does everyone look scared?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because expensive problems make people nervous." Lily giggled. A nearby spectator overheard and smirked. Ethan ignored it. He had long ago learned that dignity did not require an audience. Another technician attempted to start the engine. The Ferrari responded with nothing but an embarrassing silence. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Victoria exhaled sharply and stepped closer to the vehicle. That was when Ethan quietly moved forward, more curious than confident. He stopped a few feet away, studying the car. Not staring, observing. The way a man studies an old friend after years apart. Victoria noticed him immediately. Her gaze traveled from his boots to the grease stain near his sleeve. "Sir," she said firmly, "please stay behind the barrier." Ethan nodded politely. "I was only looking. That Ferrari isn't for spectators." The crowd listened. Some smiled. A few laughed. Victoria's voice became even colder. "And whatever you do, don't touch my Ferrari." A ripple of amusement spread through the people nearest them. Ethan simply slipped his hands into his pockets. Lily looked up at him. "Daddy, why are they worried you'll touch it?" The laughter grew slightly louder. Ethan never looked at the crowd. His eyes remained on the motionless Ferrari. The sunlight reflected across the windshield while the technicians continued arguing around it. Then, after several seconds of silence, Ethan spoke so calmly that only those closest heard him, because they don't know what's actually wrong with it. And for the first time all afternoon, Victoria Sterling stopped talking and looked at him twice. Victoria Sterling held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the man bothered her, not because he was rude, but because he was not impressed. Most people reacted when they learned who she was. They straightened their posture. They became nervous. They tried too hard. This man had done none of those things. Before she could respond, one of her lead technicians stepped forward. "Ma'am, we are still running diagnostics." Victoria finally looked away from Ethan. "Then keep running them." The technician nodded quickly. Ethan touched Lily's shoulder. "Come on, kiddo." Lily took one last curious glance toward the Ferrari before following him through the crowd. Neither noticed Victoria watching them leave. The afternoon sun remained high as Ethan and Lily crossed the parking lot toward a faded blue pickup truck that had seen better days. The paint was worn. The tires were old. The air conditioning worked only when it felt like cooperating. To Lily, it was perfect. She climbed inside and buckled her seatbelt. "Daddy." "Yeah." "You knew something was wrong with that car." Ethan started the truck. "Maybe. You always say maybe when the answer is yes." He laughed quietly as the engine rumbled to life. "That is because smart people stay curious." Lily rolled her eyes. "That means yes." They pulled onto the highway while the city skyline faded behind them. 30 miles outside Dallas, The buildings gave way to open fields, scattered ranch fences, and long stretches of road shimmering beneath the Texas heat. Ethan preferred it that way. Silence had become one of the few luxuries he could still afford. Their small home sat on 3 acres outside a quiet town where everyone knew everyone. It was not much to look at. A modest single-story house with a weathered porch and a detached garage standing a few yards away. But every board, every repaired fence post, every flower bed had been built by Ethan's own hands. Lily jumped from the truck the moment they arrived. "Can I ride my bike?" "Homework first." "5 minutes." "Homework first." She groaned dramatically and disappeared inside. Ethan smiled. The sound of the screen door closing behind her filled the air. For a moment, he stood alone beneath the late afternoon sun. Then he walked toward the garage. The familiar scent of oil, metal, and old rubber greeted him immediately. Tools hung neatly along the walls. Parts were labeled and organized. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Just order. On a shelf near the back sat a dusty storage box. Most visitors would never notice it. Ethan rarely looked at it himself. Yet today his eyes drifted toward it for a brief moment. Inside were photographs, engineering sketches, racing credentials, and memories from a life he no longer discussed. A life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He turned away and grabbed a wrench. The past had already taken enough from him. Across the city, however, Victoria Sterling sat alone inside a private conference room overlooking downtown Dallas. The failed Ferrari demonstration had become the least interesting part of her day. A tablet rested on the table before her. One of her assistants entered carrying a file. "You asked for information on the man from the expo." Victoria nodded. "What did you find?" The assistant hesitated. "Not much." Victoria looked up. "Everyone leaves a trail." Apparently not him. She opened the thin file. A home address. A repair business license. A daughter named Lily. A few tax records. Nothing more. Victoria frowned. Men did not simply disappear from the modern world. Yet somehow Ethan Walker had. And for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Sterling found herself wanting answers. The next morning began before sunrise. A pale orange glow stretched across the Texas horizon while Ethan Walker stood inside his garage with a coffee mug resting on a clutter-free workbench. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and freshly cut grass drifting through the open door. Outside, a mockingbird perched on a fence post and filled the quiet morning with song. Inside, Ethan focused on replacing a water pump in an aging pickup belonging to a local rancher. It was honest work. Predictable work. The kind of work he preferred. His phone buzzed against the workbench. He glanced at the screen and immediately ignored it. Unknown number. A few seconds later it rang again. Then again. Ethan sighed and finally answered. "Ethan Walker." "Mr. Walker, this is Olivia Grant from Sterling Automotive Technologies." Ethan paused. "I think you have the wrong number." "Actually, I do not." Her voice remained professional. "Miss Sterling would like to speak with you." Ethan looked toward the driveway where Lily was practicing free throws with a faded basketball hoop. "About what?" "The vehicle from yesterday." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "It started without me." "Yes, but she still wishes to meet." "I am busy." "Mr. Walker, she is offering compensation for your time." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is not the reason I am busy." He ended the call politely and slipped the phone back into his pocket. By noon he had nearly forgotten about it. Then a convoy of black luxury SUVs rolled slowly down the gravel road leading to his property. Lily stopped dribbling. Neighbors slowed their trucks. Curtains shifted in nearby windows. Small towns noticed everything. Ethan stepped outside as the lead vehicle came to a stop. The rear passenger door opened. Victoria Sterling emerged wearing dark sunglasses and a navy business suit that looked entirely out of place among the dusty fields and weathered fences. Lily stared. "Daddy," she whispered. "That is Ferrari lady." Victoria approached calmly. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." Ethan folded his arms. "Most people call first." "You did not answer." "That should have been a clue." For a second neither smiled. Then Lily unexpectedly stepped forward. "Did your car break again?" Victoria blinked before laughing softly. It was the first genuine laugh Ethan had heard from her. "No. Fortunately, it survived." Lily nodded with obvious relief. "Good. It was pretty." Victoria looked around the property. Nothing about it suggested wealth. Yet everything appeared carefully maintained. The porch had been repaired recently. Flower boxes sat beneath the windows. The old pickup in the driveway ran despite its age. Every detail reflected effort rather than money. "You knew something yesterday," Victoria said. Ethan remained calm. "I knew enough." "Then perhaps you can explain why 3 certified specialists could not find the issue." A warm breeze drifted through the yard. Ethan glanced toward the distant fields before answering. "Because they trusted the computer more than the machine." Victoria studied him carefully. The response sounded simple, yet something about it felt deeper than automotive advice. For the first time in years, she felt the unfamiliar pull of curiosity. And standing beneath the wide Texas sky, she realized she had not come for answers about a Ferrari anymore. She had come for answers about Ethan Walker. Victoria remained on the property longer than she intended. What was supposed to be a brief conversation stretched into nearly an hour. Not because Ethan encouraged it. Quite the opposite. Every answer he gave seemed designed to end the discussion. Yet somehow each answer created 2 new questions. Lily sat on the porch steps drawing pictures in a sketchbook while the adults talked beneath the shade of an old oak tree. A warm Texas breeze moved through the branches overhead, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant rain. "You could have charged a fortune yesterday," Victoria said. Ethan shrugged. "For 30 seconds? For knowledge. Knowledge is only valuable when it helps someone." Victoria studied him carefully. Most people spent their lives trying to prove how much they knew. Ethan seemed determined to hide it. "You really do not care who I am, do you?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward Lily before answering. "Should I?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she found herself smiling. Not because it was funny, because it was honest. Few people had spoken to her honestly in years. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Then again. Then a third time. She ignored it. Ethan noticed. "Busy day? Every day? That sounds exhausting." Victoria laughed softly. "Most people call it success. Maybe they are not the same thing." Silence settled between them. Somewhere in the distance a tractor engine hummed across an open field. Birds moved through the tall grass beyond the fence line. The world felt slower here. Simpler. Victoria realized she could not remember the last afternoon she had spent without rushing somewhere. Eventually, one of the black SUVs approached from the driveway. Her assistant stepped out carrying a tablet. "Ms. Sterling, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Reality had found her again. She thanked Ethan for his time and began walking toward the vehicle. Then she stopped. "One more question." Ethan waited. "How did you know what was wrong with the car?" For the first time all afternoon, Ethan actually seemed amused. "I listened." Victoria frowned. "That is it. Machines tell you what they need if you stop trying to impress them." She stared at him for several seconds. Then she shook her head and climbed into the SUV. The convoy disappeared down the gravel road moments later. Ethan watched until the dust settled. Lily looked up from her sketchbook. "She likes you." Ethan nearly choked on a laugh. "Where did you hear that?" "I have eyes." He smiled and shook his head. Children often notice things adults missed. Hundreds of miles away emotionally, though only 30 miles away physically, Victoria sat inside her corporate headquarters overlooking downtown Dallas. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the evening skyline as executives filled a conference room. Charts appeared on screens. Financial forecasts were discussed. New projects were approved. Yet Victoria barely heard any of it. Her thoughts kept drifting back to a small house beyond the city limits, to a quiet garage, to a man who seemed completely uninterested in wealth, status, or attention. Later that night, after everyone else had gone home, Victoria opened a private research file on Ethan Walker once more. She reviewed every document again. Business licenses, property records, school enrollment information for Lily. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. Yet the absence of information bothered her more than information itself. Then she noticed something she had overlooked. A gap. Nearly 12 years with almost no professional history at all. Victoria sat forward slowly. Most mysteries begin with what people hide. And for the first time, she was beginning to suspect that Ethan Walker was hiding an entire life. The following Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and the kind of Texas sunshine that seemed determined to brighten every surface it touched. Ethan spent the morning repairing a ranch truck while Lily sat nearby reading beneath the shade of the porch. The peaceful rhythm of the day continued until a silver sedan pulled into the driveway shortly after noon. Unlike the previous visit, there were no black SUVs. no assistants, and no security team. Victoria stepped out alone wearing simple jeans, a light sweater, and sunglasses. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked less like a billionaire executive and more like an ordinary woman trying to escape a busy world. Lily noticed her first. Ferrari lady is back. Ethan shook his head. You really need to learn her name. I know her name, Lily said proudly. I just like Ferrari lady better. Victoria laughed as she approached. I think I am stuck with that nickname. Lily smiled. Probably. There was something different about Victoria today. The tension she usually carried seemed lighter. The sharp edges of her professional confidence had softened. She held a small paper bag in one hand. Peace offering, she said. Fresh cinnamon rolls from a bakery downtown. Lily immediately approved of this decision. 20 minutes later, all three sat on the porch while a warm breeze drifted across the property. Conversation came surprisingly easily. Lily talked about school, her favorite books, and her dream of restoring an old classic truck someday. Victoria listened carefully, asking questions and laughing often. Ethan noticed how naturally she interacted with his daughter. There was no performance in it, no corporate charm, just genuine interest. As the afternoon passed, Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. There were no shareholders demanding answers, no investors expecting presentations, no reporters waiting for statements. Just a quiet porch, a curious child, and a man who never seemed impressed by money. At one point, Lily disappeared inside and returned carrying a sketchbook. Want to see something? Victoria nodded. Lily opened the pages and revealed dozens of detailed drawings of cars. Some were modern, others were classics. A few were completely original creations. Victoria looked genuinely surprised. These are really good. Lily beamed. Daddy taught me how engines work. Victoria glanced toward Ethan. You taught a 10-year-old engine design? Ethan shrugged. She asked questions. Most adults do not understand half of this. Lily smiled proudly. Daddy understands everything. Ethan nearly spilled his coffee. Victoria laughed again, but the comment lingered in her mind. Later, while Lily played in the yard, Victoria and Ethan sat quietly watching the sunset paint the fields gold and amber. The sky stretched endlessly above them. Do you ever miss the city? Victoria asked. Ethan thought for a moment. Not really. Do you miss who you used to be? This time the silence lasted longer. The distant sound of crickets began filling the evening air. Ethan finally answered. Sometimes the hardest thing in life is deciding which parts of yourself deserve to stay in the past. Victoria looked at him carefully. It was the closest thing to a personal answer he had ever given her. And somehow it confirmed what she already suspected. Ethan Walker was not hiding because he had failed. He was hiding because he had walked away from something extraordinary. Victoria did not sleep much that night. The conversation on the porch lingered in her thoughts long after the Texas sunset had faded. By sunrise, she was already seated in her office overlooking downtown Dallas, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her desk. The city moved below in its usual rhythm of traffic, ambition, and urgency. Yet her attention remained fixed on a single name displayed across her monitor. Ethan Walker. She had spent weeks trying to understand why a man with extraordinary knowledge lived such an ordinary life. Now she intended to find out. Unlike previous searches, this time she hired a professional archival researcher who specialized in recovering forgotten corporate records. Hours passed. Meetings came and went. Then shortly after noon, a secure file arrived. Victoria opened it. What she found left her completely silent. 20 years earlier, Ethan Walker had not been a local mechanic. He had been one of the youngest engineering prodigies in the performance automotive industry. At 23, he had helped design breakthrough engine systems that attracted attention from major manufacturers across America. At 26, he had become part of an elite development team working on experimental high-performance technology. Industry magazines had once described him as a future leader capable of reshaping modern automotive engineering. Victoria scrolled through old photographs. There he was standing beside prototypes worth millions of dollars. There he was presenting technical concepts at conferences attended by executives from around the world. There he was smiling confidently, surrounded by opportunities most engineers spend a lifetime chasing. Then the records abruptly changed. Professional appearances stopped. Publications ended. Patent filings disappeared. Interviews vanished. It was as though Ethan had simply stepped out of history. Victoria continued reading. Buried within archived reports, she found the reason. A project years earlier had ended in tragedy after an accident claimed the life of a close colleague and friend. No misconduct had ever been attributed to Ethan. Investigations cleared everyone involved. Yet according to former associates, the event changed him completely. Within months, he resigned from multiple positions, withdrew from public life, and disappeared from the industry. Victoria leaned back slowly. The room felt unusually quiet. For years, she had assumed successful people always fought harder after setbacks. Ethan had chosen something different. He had walked away, not because he lacked talent, not because he failed, because some losses changed the meaning of success itself. That evening, Victoria drove alone to Ethan's property once again. The sun hung low over the fields as she found him repairing an old tractor near the garage. He looked up when her car arrived. "You are becoming a regular visitor," he said. Victoria stepped out and studied him for a long moment. "I know who you were." Ethan's hands stopped moving. Neither spoke. A warm breeze drifted through the tall grass surrounding them. Somewhere nearby, Lily laughed while chasing fireflies across the yard. Finally, Ethan set down his wrench. "Then you know enough." Victoria shook her head gently. "No, I think I finally know why you left." Ethan looked toward his daughter. The fading sunlight reflected softly across his face. "Some things matter more than being impressive," he said quietly. And in that moment, Victoria realized the greatest thing Ethan Walker had ever built was not an engine, a company, or a career. It was the peaceful life standing right in front of him. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected sense of balance into Ethan's life. Victoria visited when her schedule allowed. Sometimes she stayed for coffee on the porch. Sometimes she helped Lily with school projects. Sometimes she simply sat in silence, watching the sunset paint the Texas fields gold. For a brief moment, it felt as though two completely different worlds had somehow found common ground. Then the outside world noticed. It started with a photograph. A local blogger captured an image of Victoria and Ethan talking beside a farmer's market stand one Saturday morning. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By Monday, business websites were running headlines. By Tuesday, financial commentators were discussing it on television. By Wednesday, social media had turned Ethan Walker into a topic of national curiosity. Some people celebrated the story. Others mocked it. Billionaire CEO spends weekends with small-town mechanic. Mystery man captures corporate queen's attention. Is this romance or public relations? The headlines multiplied. So did the opinions. Ethan ignored them. He continued repairing trucks, mowing his lawn, and helping Lily with homework. But Victoria could not ignore them so easily. Every article created new questions from investors. Every interview request generated more pressure. Inside Sterling Automotive Technologies, concern began spreading through the executive ranks. One Thursday afternoon, Victoria entered a board meeting and immediately sensed the mood. No one discussed quarterly projections. No one mentioned production targets. Instead, one board member cleared his throat. "Victoria, we need to address the publicity situation." The room grew quiet. Another executive slid a folder across the table. "Several investors are concerned." Victoria opened it. Inside were printed articles, social media comments, and opinion pieces questioning her judgment. Some mocked Ethan's profession. Others suggested he was seeking financial gain. A few implied he was unworthy of standing beside someone of her status. Victoria felt her jaw tighten. "You have never met him," she said calmly. "That is not the point," one director replied. "Public perception matters. Character matters more." The room fell silent. Yet the pressure continued. Outside the company, reporters began appearing near Ethan's town. Photographers waited outside local businesses. Strangers posted pictures online whenever they saw him. For the first time in years, Ethan's peaceful life was no longer private. The hardest part was Lily. One afternoon, she climbed into his pickup after school, looking unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked gently. Lily stared out the window. "Some kid said you are famous now." Ethan smiled. "I am definitely not famous. They also said rich people only talk to regular people when they want something." The smile faded from Ethan's face. He parked beside the road and looked at his daughter. "Lily, listen carefully. A person's value is not measured by money, titles, or headlines. It is measured by how they treat others." She nodded slowly. "Like you always say?" "Exactly." That evening, hundreds of miles away emotionally, though only a short drive away physically, Victoria sat alone in her office overlooking the Dallas skyline. The city lights shimmered beneath the darkening sky. Her phone buzzed continuously with messages from advisors, executives, and investors. For the first time in years, she felt trapped between two worlds. One demanded approval. The other offered peace. And deep in her heart, she already knew which one mattered more. 3 days later, the crisis arrived. It began with a phone call just after sunrise. Victoria was already in her office when her chief engineering officer entered without knocking. One look at his face told her something was wrong. "We have a problem," he said. "How bad?" "Very." He placed a tablet on her desk. Test data filled the screen. Performance graphs. Diagnostic reports. Failure notices. Victoria scanned the information and felt her stomach tighten. The company's newest high-performance prototype, a project representing years of research and billions of dollars in future contracts, was failing during final validation testing. The launch event was only 8 days away. Investors were arriving from around the world. Media coverage had already been scheduled. There was no time for delays. Yet the vehicle continued developing an unpredictable systems fault that no one could explain. "What are we missing?" Victoria asked. The engineer shook his head. "We have brought in specialists from California, Michigan, and Germany. Everyone sees the symptoms. Nobody sees the cause." Throughout the day, the pressure intensified. Emergency meetings replaced normal schedules. Teams worked late into the evening. Experts reviewed every component. Software was checked. Hardware was replaced. Entire assemblies were re-examined. Nothing worked. The prototype continued failing. By the 5th day, anxiety filled every hallway inside Sterling Automotive Technologies. Executives whispered. Investors demanded updates. Rumors spread across financial media. Competitors quietly celebrated. Late that evening, Victoria stood alone inside the development facility, staring at the silent vehicle positioned beneath bright white lights. Engineers moved around it with exhausted expressions. The building smelled of metal, electronics, and stale coffee. Nobody spoke much anymore. They had run out of theories. Victoria slowly walked around the prototype. Then she remembered another machine, another crowd, another impossible problem, and one man who had solved it by listening. 2 hours later, her car rolled down the familiar gravel road toward Ethan's property. The porch light was still on when she arrived. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. "You look tired," he said. Victoria laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Only to everyone." She told him everything. The failing prototype, the approaching launch, the pressure, the fear of disappointing thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's success. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, silence settled between them. Crickets filled the warm night air. Finally he spoke. "Why are you telling me?" Victoria met his eyes. "Because every expert I have hired keeps looking at the problem. And you are the only person I know who looks for the truth." Ethan smiled faintly. "That sounds more impressive than I deserve." "No," she said quietly. "It sounds exactly right." The next morning, Ethan drove to Dallas. He arrived wearing the same simple work shirt he always wore. No one recognized him at first. Some employees stared. A few executives exchanged doubtful looks. One manager whispered, "That is the man?" Ethan ignored them. Dignity had never required approval. Victoria met him at the entrance and walked him directly to the prototype. Engineers watched carefully. Reporters outside knew nothing about his visit. Investors knew nothing. The future of a multi-billion-dollar project rested inside a silent building while one small-town mechanic slowly circled a machine worth more than most private jets. He listened. He observed. He touched nothing. And after nearly 10 minutes, Ethan Walker finally smiled. The smile on Ethan's face immediately changed the atmosphere inside the development facility. Exhausted engineers stopped what they were doing. Executives exchanged uncertain glances. Victoria stepped closer. "You found something?" Ethan nodded. "I think I found what everyone missed." One engineer folded his arms. "We have spent months testing this system." Ethan remained calm. "I know. Then what did we miss?" Ethan pointed toward a small section of the prototype's integrated control architecture. "You kept treating the symptom as the problem." Silence followed. He continued walking around the vehicle. "The failure appears random because everyone assumed the primary system was responsible. It is not." He explained his observations carefully. No dramatic speech. No attempt to impress anyone. Just facts. One by one, the engineers began checking his theory. 10 minutes later, confusion appeared on their faces. 20 minutes later, disbelief replaced confusion. 30 minutes later, the chief engineering officer looked directly at Victoria. He is right. The room fell completely silent. The actual fault had been hidden behind a chain of secondary responses that masked its origin. Every expert had been studying the visible problem while the true source remained buried in plain sight. The correction itself was surprisingly simple. The realization was not. 48 hours later, the prototype completed its testing cycle flawlessly. Every benchmark passed. Every system performed beyond expectations. The launch event proceeded as scheduled. Journalists arrived from across the country. Investors filled the front rows. Industry leaders gathered beneath bright lights inside a massive presentation hall overlooking downtown Dallas. Giant screens displayed the future of automotive innovation. Cameras rolled. Applause echoed. Yet Victoria found herself thinking about a quiet garage outside a small Texas town. Backstage, Ethan stood near an exit wearing the same modest clothes he always wore. He had no interest in interviews. No desire for recognition. Lily stood beside him holding his hand. "Are we leaving?" she asked. Ethan smiled. That was the plan. Before they could go, Victoria's voice filled the auditorium. "Before we conclude today's presentation, there is one more person I would like everyone to meet." Thousands of eyes turned toward the stage. Ethan froze. Victoria looked directly at him. "Please come up here." The audience watched as the small-town mechanic slowly walked forward with Lily beside him. Murmurs spread throughout the room. Some recognized him from recent headlines. Many did not. Victoria waited until they reached center stage. Then she addressed the crowd. People often assume success comes from titles, wealth, or influence. The room grew quiet. This project exists today because one man reminded us that wisdom begins with humility. She turned toward Ethan. When everyone else was trying to prove how much they knew, he simply listened. No one spoke. No one moved. Victoria smiled softly. "The richest thing I have ever discovered was not a company, a contract, or a technology. It was character." The silence that followed felt different from applause. It was deeper. Thousands of people looking at a man they finally understood. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly, uncomfortable with attention as always. Then Lily squeezed his hand. He looked down and smiled. Around them, executives stood first, then engineers, then investors. One by one, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. Not because Ethan demanded recognition, not because he sought admiration, but because quiet dignity has a way of revealing itself when the noise finally fades. And standing beneath the bright lights, with his daughter beside him and Victoria smiling nearby, Ethan Walker realized something important. He had spent years believing he walked away from the most meaningful chapter of his life. The truth was far simpler. The most meaningful chapter had only just begun.